introduction, and I'm wondering if that was Catherine who did that. No,
Yeah.
I think it was. So I think that what kind of blew me away when I was talking to Chris was that he has also started his own events and community building, and has been doing it for a little while, and then started a company that in my mind was very non-traditional in the approach that he's doing it, which I think is really cool. And then he's bringing a unique perspective from a background in psychology to understanding human desire, behavior, and how this plays out in social media, which is, I think, a topic everybody is should be, if you're not paying attention to, because it's like drives everything right now for anybody who works for themselves. So we'll bring Chris up in a minute if you have questions or comments. So if you feel some expertise that you want to share related to the topic we talk about, just raise your hand and we'll start bringing people in, to give that. Or if you have a question, do the same, or feel free to, throw it in the chat as we go. Before we get started, I'm just going to share something that Dave and I have been working on that's been really helpful for me. So whatever you can, get out of it, hopefully, take. So the idea here is around clarity of thinking about what is the one thing or two things that I can concentrate my efforts on to make the maximum impact for myself to be successful. And we've talked a little bit about the steps to this. And the first step is to know what success is. So I talked about that a few weeks ago, and then in our newsletter laid out my 4 slides of that. So we call it Live Your Best Life Today and into the future, know what that looks like. So it's multidimensional. So what I've seen for myself is, I've been financially successful and professionally successful, and then really not happy and burned out on that, a lot of the time. So looking at things very specifically around, what do I want my personal life to be look like? What do I joy of work? What kind of work do I really want to be doing, and who do I want to be surrounded with? And then purpose and vision realized. So what do I want to manifest in the world that'll make an impact for other people? What does that look like? And then security and stability. What do I have to have so I can do all this? And that's where the financial part often comes. So what we found is I mapped that out. Things started getting a lot clearer, but then the question is, what are the obstacles to getting there? So the methodology that's really worked for us is you list out all the obstacles. So we think of it as like trees falling on the road ahead of us. So I'm like walking down this, road in a dream state, the end of the road. If somebody could mute that, I'd appreciate it. You get down to you're looking at the door at the end of the road, and it's like getting farther and farther away, and these trees are falling down, in front of you, and trying to figure out, how do you get there? So the idea is you write down all the trees that are falling, so all the obstacles. And then, and I'll share my screen here and get into the next step of that. Then what you do is you organize them in little cards. So you write them all out in these little cards, and we're using a software tool to do this, Lucid Chart, but you can do it in sticky notes if you want. I think it's a lot easier in a software tool, but depending on what you're comfortable with. And what happens is, and this is not my version of this, this is my version of this is what we did for our market. So I've been gathering data over the last 18 months in a spreadsheet format from solopreneurs who are telling me where they focused, what are the issues they're going through, what are they trying to accomplish, what are they doing to get there, where are they getting stuck, and the motivators that are leading to making decisions to try new things and buy solutions. So we've got tons of data. So we're kind of looking at that as a list of problems. So I set this up talking about myself and doing it for myself. I'm not showing that one. It's pretty personal. It gets real deep, but this is an example of what we're finding in the solopreneur market. So there's a dilemma that comes out at the top of this tree, and it seems to work this way for some reason. And the dilemma here is, this is what we hear. I don't feel that I'm making progress towards my goals. And at the same time, I'm suspicious of claims by coaches and trainers. So what does this mean? It's stuck. It means I'm screwed either way. So on the one hand, I'm not sure what to do to get where I want to go. But on the other hand, I don't really trust all this stuff that people are selling to me, because I've seen a lot of it not work, and I'm not sure which ones to buy or who I can count on to really make an impact. So you got all these little cards, all these obstacles, the trees that are falling in the road. You got them all written down. They're not organized at first. You throw them in these little cards in the software tool or sticky notes on the living room floor. And then you start looking for the relationships between them. So that's what we did. So we're looking, okay, here's what I know. This is what people are saying. This is the data from in their words, what people are saying. And it's what's causing this. So you start organizing the cards. Now, this is a simplified version of it. It's actually 3 times the size of this, but it would be too confusing to explain. So right here is where it starts. I don't know precisely what the impact will be of overcoming any given obstacle, and I have many obstacles keeping me from reaching my goals. Therefore, I don't know what my most important obstacle is. This tells me that the problem to solve, the obstacle to bust and overcome, destroy, is I don't know what my most important obstacle is. If I know what my most important obstacle is, you start working up this thing. Then I feel like I'm making progress towards my goal. I know what my most important obstacle is, and I know what kind of program will work for me, and I can clearly articulate what that program is. Now you get there by kind of working up this tree. So, I don't know what my most important obstacle is. Therefore, I live in a reactive world of fighting perceived fires. I'm not sure what I should be working on each day. I take an educated guess at what I need coaching or training on. And then you start seeing the cause and effect relationships between all these things, right? Well, if I don't know what my obstacle is, I take an educated guess at what I need to fix. When I do get something complete, then it usually does not have the impact that I expected. Well, of course not, because you don't know what your obstacle is. You don't know what the most important obstacle is. Well, that leads towards, I don't feel like I'm making progress. So I won't go through all of these, but think of them flipped. So a phase after this is you start flipping these things to positive, and then put a program together to figure out how to bust this obstacle right here, which makes a massive impact. What I was doing, and I think most people are doing, is solving things at the top of this tree. For example, I don't finish a lot of the training courses I pay for. What's a solution to that? Persistence. So now I'm more persistent. I finished the training courses. Now I like what I did, but I'm still not making any progress towards my goals because maybe I took the wrong one because I didn't know what the right one was. So what I'd be curious about is if people have their own version of this in terms of the obstacles you see you're facing, throw them in the chat. And we'd like to, give everybody an opportunity to kind of give their own version of this. And we're not going to, obviously have time to talk through it, but, feel free to share it in the chat and we can sort of learn from each other, sort of what we're going through. So before I get to Chris, does anybody have any questions about this or comments or their own experiences with using this sort of a methodology?
Larry, I would say the first thing that I think of is calculating return on investment and customer acquisition costs if you already have a current business, because then you start to be able to pour fuel on what's working and then avoid what's not. And that's the first thing that I thought of and related to it as you started sharing that. But it gets murky when you don't have that yet. You don't have a lot of that data to drive it. So I love that you've been able to put this in a visual, because I'm a visual thinker. So I really, really love this layout. So I'd love to hear what you guys have to say during this meeting. Thank
you. Great, thanks.
Larry, you have one short question, if
sure.
I can. So how you're starting to building this visuals, like you're starting from the roots, or you're finding like at the top and you're just moving down, moving backwards, so you chank it, or what was the process of creating this map?
Dave, you want to handle that one? You
Sure.
could do it, but why don't you do it?
The short answer, Izzy, is that like a detective, you follow the evidence. All right. So depending on what you wrote down as obstacles, they may be in the middle of the tree, they may be in the bottom. So you build these trees both ways. Okay. So the up is the effect of the cause. The down is the cause of the last effect. So it's, as you know, if you noticed on the diagram, the arrows are going up, right? So the arrows are actually the definition of the cause. So the way that we start it is you start number one, you want to state your obstacles in full sentences so that you can actually read them. Okay. So you want to say, because I'm doing X, then Y happens. All right. And you need to question that. Maybe that's a jump in logic that doesn't work. But as the trick to finding the impact obstacle is usually the one that's at the bottom when you're finished, because that's the one that has the biggest chain of effects, but it doesn't start off that way. You don't always start at the bottom. In fact, the very first thing you're going to do is put the top things up there because that's what you know. But then what can happen is the top can grow because you're asking the question, well, what happens when I feel like I'm not making progress? Then you can have a whole nother level. But it's where your mind and whoever you're doing it with takes you is the answer to the question.
There's two parts of it there's multiple parts of it, but there's kind of different use cases for this approach that we've used to our advantage. One is what I showed you, which is the market insight. So really understanding your market and what matters for your market. So when we realized that it's pretty obvious that the biggest issue for solopreneurs is, I don't know what my most important obstacle is. We're designing the company around figuring out your most important obstacle and solving it. That just sort of sprung up. So understanding your market with data is important because this all comes from data. It's conversational data. You're going to know what to do. You'll have that clarity of your market and what they'll buy, where the interest is. The second piece is doing it for yourself. So you construct the company that gets you where you want to get in your life, not just financially successful with the ROI, but bigger than that. Like you build a company. I've been very successful financially in moments in my life. I was making $400,000 or $500,000 a year sometimes, and I didn't like what I was doing. I was miserable with what I built, because what I built didn't get me to where I wanted to get, but I got an ROI on all the efforts that I was doing, but it never got me where I wanted to get. So looking at things in that broader picture is what this does. And I'll say one more thing, and then anybody else has a comment, and then we should go to Chris. But what this did for me personally was got me out of my head first. It got me out of the box of thinking that I was in, where I assumed all this knowledge that wasn't really true about my market and about myself. I was wrong. And third, it got me out of my own way. So I was able to start taking actions every day that were are more effective and much more targeted, but are not the things I thought I should be doing. So this is an exercise that only works for people who are willing to be wrong. So there's got to be some like personal insight capability, I guess, if you want to call it that. Because I know from my own experience, it was kind of like, wow. I was totally wrong about what I was doing and what I was seeing. Because like Kristen said, when it's visualized, you're not doing it in your own head anymore. It's out there like a science experiment, and you're the subject of the experiment. And the market is too, but you're seeing it in a totally different way than if you were just like brainstorming it. Any more questions or comments? And then we'll get started with Chris.
I'd love to hear what other people's obstacles have been, Larry, because sometimes I feel like I'm so close to the problem that I can't visualize what the problems might be for myself.
Yes, get out of your own head is the solution to that. And that's what I was hoping is people will put in the chat, the obstacles, and we'll add them to this tree.
Yeah, please do that. I mean, just
you know,
off the top of your head, whatever comes to you, what is your obstacle? You'll be amazed at what it looks like when you put all that together. So let's please participate.
Overscheduling, exactly, perfect. So so let's get started with the conversation with Chris then. Let's see if you guys could highlight, yeah, put me and
Awesome.
Chris up on stage there. So this is a different conversation. So these things are not related. I could never like bring somebody in specifically about all this stuff that I'm talking about. So we're pivoting here. And we're going to talk about psychology and human behavior and social media. But welcome, Chris. Thanks for coming and doing this. First, before we get started, you want to talk a little bit about your community, and feel free to put as we go, a link in the chat. So anybody here, I've joined Chris's groups and really enjoyed them. So I'd recommend anybody, if you're looking for another group to go to, it's a good place to be. So do you want to describe sort of what these groups are and sort of how you started them?
Certainly. So I believe that any good virtual networking group meets certain criteria in that they're free to attend, they don't require you to show up, and they're gate kept by the host, right? So you want to go into a meeting knowing that you can trust every person that you meet there. And you want everyone who's in that meeting to want to be in that meeting, to really actually be showing up ready to go because they want to be, because otherwise they wouldn't be there, right? So I have two groups that kind of follow this formula. One is called the Corner Call. And it's called such because the idea is that you're in one another's corner, helping one another round the corner in your businesses. I take everyone who shows up on our call and I break them into 6-person breakout rooms. And these breakout rooms last for the entire hour of the call. And the goal is for everyone to really enter into a business huddle, just like you're on the football field preparing for a play. And there's one featured person in each room who's come to the call with their business, working on a certain challenge or series of challenges or series of goals. And the challenge for the whole group is to, achieve as much as they can within this 1 hour time period in terms of pushing this business forward. So it's meant to be an intellectual exercise that's really stimulating. And you're all welcome. The other group I have is a group called Super Connectors. And this is a group mostly geared towards people who either organize groups or are really great connectors. People who other people call super connectors when they're not in the room. So I think it's good, especially when you have people who are group organizers and do a lot for their communities, that they're being supported as well. And it's good to have resources really geared towards them and helping them help each other, especially when they have certain issues as people who run groups, that it'd be nice to be able to relate to others around. So I'll cut myself off there. I'm excited about our topic today. And I think it's gonna be a good conversation.
Yeah, let's get right into it. And we'll talk about the relationship of your business to the topic first, just to give some context to that. But what was so interesting to me about you was you actually created a business where you're not the domain expert necessarily inside the business doing the thing the business does, which I think is very different
I'm not an
from what I'm
artist.
seeing. Right, you're not an artist, but you're doing artistry as part of the business. Right. You want to explain kind of how that works?
You bet. Here's actually an example of my art from this morning. I drew a dog. So you can see the kind of artist I am. But I have a content marketing firm. So we focus on running social media management and helping people create content that is impactful, that matters. I don't believe in social media for its own sake. You should not be on social media just because you feel like it's something you should be doing. You should be on social media because as per your card chart, that you shared earlier, Larry, that your efforts are directly part of your strategy that supports your goals. And so a lot of my focus is around keeping people centered, around ensuring that social media is effective, and not just that it's meant to help you towards your goal, but that the posts and the engagement they're getting are actively, materially, measurably supporting you. But one of our, I think our central topic today is around belief systems.
Mhm.
So I'm glad to jump into that if you're
Yep.
ready for it.
Yeah, let's do it.
So I think we all make a basic, I'm sure you've all heard the phrase before, I won't believe it till I see it, right? You've probably said it yourself. This is essentially our measure for objective truth. If you perceive something directly through a first person experience, you can verify that it's real. But I'm here today to help you break that assumption a little bit, because touching something is not a first person experience. Because there's something between your conscious experience and the things that you experience out in the world, which is your brain. And it is actively warping all of your experiences all the time in ways that you don't perceive. And it's important to become aware of these things because they have a huge material impact on our lives. For example, there are 40 people on the call right now, and I bet none of you, until I say it, are thinking about the feeling of your butt on your seat right now. Actively, there are neurons, telling you that you're in a seat, constantly reminding you that your feet are touching the ground, that you're in your seat, that you have a certain posture, but you're not actively aware of that because your brain is always filtering all the information that's coming in through all of your sensory experiences to help essentially, as far as it trying to figure out what it believes is going to be relevant to your experience or what you need in order to survive and be a healthy human. So that's just kind of one example of this filter that can occur. I want to share another example with you. I'm going to quickly share my screen here.
Do you have the screen share? Okay, good.
There are certain individuals who have brain lesions that lead to them having a condition called hemi-neglect. And what this means is that people can lose perception of half of their visual space. So it's not that their eyes aren't working correctly or that the brain isn't able to process visual information, but their consciousness loses the ability to actively perceive half of the space that they can actually physically see. So patients with hemi-neglect, if you show them a picture of a clock, for example, and you ask them to draw it back for you, they will draw a picture that looks like this over here, where it says patient's copy. And you'll see that essentially only half the clock is filled in. But if you ask that patient if they've accurately recreated the picture, they would tell you that they have. And they have absolutely no awareness that half of their vision or half of their awareness is missing. And we have these kinds of experiences as well all the time, and we don't perceive them because of course we don't, right? It's our brain that's responsible for perceiving. And if it's missing something, there is no way we're going to find what that thing is. Yeah, thank you for sharing that link, Lynn. That's wonderful. So I want to talk about belief systems because belief is not a visual experience, but it is something that is very much colored by the way that our brains have evolved as we've matured as humans. Businesses are built on belief, right? So somebody, your client comes to you believing that they have an issue or a need and believing that you can solve their issue and believing in your skills and in your mission and your ability to make them successful. Everything is built on beliefs. So that includes trust, buying behavior, motivation, loyalty, perspective, and identity. Your identity is essentially built out of your beliefs. If I was to ask you, if I was to ask Larry, Larry, what would you say defines you? What is your identity? Larry would start off that reply listing off his beliefs about who he is as a person, right? Our beliefs are the building blocks of who we are. And that's just something to be cognizant of. So I want to share another essentially scenario with you. There are certain people who deal with seizures that are uncontrollable and random. And they really live tough lives because they can't drive. They can't care for themselves because they never know when they're going to essentially lose control of their body. And there were some doctors in the 70s who had this brilliant idea, which was to essentially take a person's brain. And your brain is actually really like two half brains connected by a little cord called the corpus callosum and snip the brain in half. So just cut the cord holding the two halves of your brain together, in the hope that it would help these patients not have these seizures. And sure enough, this practice was effective. And for several decades, it was standard practice for people who struggle with acute seizures to undergo a surgical process through which the neural connection between the two halves of their brain is completely severed. And you might say, well, Chris, what are the side effects of snipping your brain in half? And it actually turns out that there are very few, if any, side effects. You can live your life completely normally with two half brains that can't communicate with one another. And I find this to be mind-blowing, and it says a lot about even our perceptions of how our brains work, how we think about ourselves as individuals, or what we think the mind's role is in defining our identity. But there are a few exploitable quirks that you can actually use to run experiments on people that have split brains. Namely, when you view visual space in front of you, right now you're looking at your screen, you're looking at the area around your screen. Your eyes have a lot of overlap in their vision. So your left eye is seeing most of your visual field, and your right eye is seeing most of your visual field. However, the way that your brain processes this visual information is that it takes the left half of all the information that both of your eyes perceive and processes it in the right side of your brain. It takes all the information from the other, the left side of your visual field, process it in the other side. So what this means is that if you have somebody stare at a particular point, like right at the center of a screen or on a certain dot, and then you flash information to one side of the visual field or the other side, you can actually independently communicate with one half of the brain or the other. And this is interesting because it now allows you to implant beliefs into a person that it's not aware of, right? So you can implant a belief into one half of your brain and have the other half of your brain not be aware. So there's a study run where some scientists took some split brain patients and they had them essentially look at this projector, and they flashed a message to one side of the brain, essentially saying, scratch your hand. And they flashed this message on the left-hand side of the person's visual field. So of course, one half of your brain controls one half of your body, the other half of your brain controls the other half. So the one hand that was told to scratch its hand would actually start scratching the person's hand. But the side of your brain responsible for language is typically the opposite side of your dominant hand. So if you ask a person a question, if they're a split brain patient, only one half of the brain can actually verbally respond to you. These researchers would ask these patients, why are you scratching your hand? Out loud, verbally. And the side of their brain that didn't know what was going on would reply back, I had an itch. And every single time that this experiment was run, the answer was the same. Every single patient made an excuse for why they were scratching their hand, and not a single person said, I don't know. I don't know why I'm scratching my hand right now. Now, I'm going to unshare here. The point I really want to hone in on is that our brains are actively curating our life experiences. It's kind of like we're in a movie and the production team is sitting between us and our lived experience. We always want to rationalize everything that we see or experience in our lives. And we do it all the time without noticing. And once you become aware of the fact that your brain's doing this, it can lead you to become a lot more careful about forming beliefs. And so I'm gonna change tacks here and then bring this point back in. Back when humans were hunter-gatherers, it was more important, generally speaking, to have your belief be to be the dominant belief than for it to be correct. If you manage a societal structure in your tribe, and you say we need to go north to set up our next camp, and other people in the group disagree, if they may be right, that would be better to go south to set up your next camp. But if they win out, your authority is undermined and the structure of the group is undermined, which can lead to a lack of planning coordination that leads to a breakdown of that unit. So when people form beliefs, they're much more concerned with protecting the beliefs they have than trying to be correct. And the answer to dealing with this phenomena is to catch people before they form beliefs. So once someone has already formed a belief, there's very little you can do to change their beliefs, but there's a lot you can do before someone forms a belief to help them. Namely, when you speak to a person and you say, you know, again, if I ask Larry the question, do you like chocolate or vanilla ice cream more? Larry may not know the answer in the very moment I ask him, but he'll think about it, ruminate for a few seconds, and he'll say, Chris, I like chocolate ice cream more. And that's great. But the reality is, Larry doesn't really have the belief that he likes chocolate ice cream. He just had to make a choice in that moment because I presented him a binary option. And for now on, Larry is going to go through his life whenever anyone asks him what his favorite type of ice cream is and say chocolate, because he made a decision and he's sticking with it, not because he actually likes chocolate more. So I have this article I wanted to share with all of you here from the Oatmeal. And it essentially details some of the nuances of how we form beliefs and why it's important. But I'm going to progress forward to how this applies to your marketing process. Beliefs drive buying behavior. So when you run a social media process, it is important that your ads essentially address people on an emotional level. If somebody challenges a belief of yours, what typically happens? You have an emotional response. Your pupils dilate, your face becomes flushed with blood, and your attention acutely narrows. In the same way that you would if you were experiencing a physical threat, because your beliefs are the basis of your identity, and your identity is the same as you as a person. So if someone's attacking your beliefs, it's like they're attacking you physically. Your body doesn't have the ability to separate out these two experiences. Likewise, reaffirming a belief is also a positive experience. It essentially provides someone a feeling of safety. Any social media process that tries to make an argument is not going to be successful because it's not going to stick in a person's mind. When you lead with an emotionally salient experience, something that inspires anger, sadness, joy, hope, these are the things people remember and relate back to. So a lot of the work that I do comes down to helping people identify the emotional experience behind what they're trying to sell versus just making people aware of a product or service or the capabilities of their tools. And that's my breakdown.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris. It's it's a lot to unpack, and I think the relevance is so important to us. And to get into this deeper thinking around principles and human behavior and biology is the difference, I think, to being really successful and just kind of floundering around for years. So really understanding the root kind of systems for me has been something I've really been studying hard the last year and a half. And I'm wondering what you think about what you see in social media commenting. So the best practices on LinkedIn right now are find a point of view that you really stand for, know your audience specifically, be able to articulate that point of view as a leader, even if it's controversial, because you're connecting with your audience and maybe carving out a space and disconnecting from other people who may oppose it, right? And then that's the content program. And then a lot of commenting. So really getting connected into people's threads, and that's been very effective for me. So you're standing for what you stand for. So given what you're saying here, how do you see that process playing out successfully and not successfully, kind of given the biology of what you're seeing?
Yeah. I also want to address Jocelyn's comment here in the chat. Should my post be aimed at making people comfortable or uncomfortable? I think it's kind of along a similar vein. I would say, the experience I'm finding that is the prevailing narrative right now is that even though making people uncomfortable moves them to act and moves them to make changes in their lives, it typically leads them to make avoidance changes. So if you're uncomfortable, like let's say, you fall off your bike and you slide on some concrete and your hands are now chafed and bloody. What are you doing? You're biting your tongue, you're turning away, you're yelling, you're crying. All these behaviors are avoidance behaviors. And typically when we find things online that we disagree with, we'll consume them because we want to know what's going on, but it doesn't lead us to want to make buying behaviors, right? So you actually do want to make people comfortable. Typically you want to find things that resonate with people and lead them to want to contribute and agree and come together rather than become divided. In fact, part of the reason for a lot of the political polarization we're seeing is that news channels recently have done some studies on the guests that they bring on their shows. Do cable audiences like when CNN or Fox brings in someone from a political party that's kind of contrary to that platform's perspective to have debate? And on both sides, the answer is unequivocal. The cable viewers want nothing to do with the other side's perspective. They do not want to see it. They don't want to hear it. They want to experience it. They don't want the person invited back on their show. They keep going, why are you giving this person a platform? And that happens on both sides. So, one example actually is Tucker Carlson. New York Times did like a breakdown of his show guests over the last 3 years. And in the last year, he has not had anybody who essentially is not someone he agrees with. So even though you think of Tucker Carlson as someone who's very combative and likes to get into arguments with, people who oppose his perspective, his show has actually completely tossed that aspect of their programming out the window due to what audiences are looking for. On LinkedIn in particular, the content that essentially does really well, there are some common threads, some common patterns that you'll see. One of them is almost every successful post has a picture on it, right? So it's not just you sharing experience or articulating it very well, but there is a picture, and it is a picture of the focus of the article, whether that's you or of a different person whose experience you're talking about. And it includes their face, them looking at the camera, and them expressing a emotional state of some kind. Why is this? One of the major drivers of human behavior is mirror neurons. So when I describe the experience of that person falling off the bike and putting out their palms and them sliding along the concrete, I bet some of you had a visceral experience, just a very mild one, going like, ugh. I can imagine being in that situation and not being very comfortable with that. Why did you feel that? Because you're putting yourself in the position of that person who fell off their bike, and it's not a pleasant experience. We do this all the time, whether we want to or not. If we're watching a football game and someone gets injured, we go, oof, oh my gosh, I can't believe that happened. We are feeling the discomfort and we're feeling that adrenaline rush as though we were on the field. When our team scores a touchdown, we're jumping up and down cheering because we feel like we scored the touchdown, right? When someone reads your LinkedIn article, you want them to be able to relate to your experience. So you need to give them a vessel. You need to give them a person they can insert themselves into to better immerse themselves in that experience. Also, you might enjoy a piece of content, but that's different from enjoying a piece of content and then liking the article and then commenting on the article, because those things are extra effort. So one of the major problems with these social media is there's a lot of really compelling content out there that's good and is worth including on these platforms, but it doesn't get a lot of engagement because it doesn't make a person think, I need to like this, right? Like you might give someone a tip on LinkedIn being like, I just tried a strategy where I set a bedtime alarm every day at 10:30. This is actually true. I set an alarm that reminds me it's time to go to sleep, and it helps me make sure that I'm getting enough sleep every night. I could share that, life tip on LinkedIn for other professionals trying to manage their productivity, and it's not going to get a lot of engagement. I could share another story talking about issues with sleep apnea and, struggling with productivity related to sleep deprivation, and then go through my experience on my recovery journey and the things that I did to come out of that experience. This is not true. I don't have those issues. And then share, a picture of me before and after beneath that. And I'm going to get a whole lot of engagement on my post because it's an experience. It's a story. It's personal, right? So there's a difference between giving someone a tip and sharing an experience that you've had. And every single time the experience wins out. If you want to sell somebody a toothbrush, you don't want to tell them, oh, this toothbrush is 50% more effective at cleaning plaque. You want to have a person talking about how they switch toothbrushes and the visceral experience they have going, oh my gosh, that was just a completely different experience brushing my teeth. When you see car commercials nowadays, you see less and less commercials where people are driving cars and more examples where Chevy is like unveiling a new vehicle and there's like a focus group of people who've never seen the car before and they go, oh my gosh, this car looks incredible. These features look amazing. I am so excited to test drive this thing, because they want to put you in that experience, right? And so you're going to see more and more of this experiential behavior in the future, where you're going to be more concerned with seeing people's reactions to experiences versus the experiences or the items being sold themselves. You see this on Twitch. So people who are streamers, people are watching their content not because they want to see the video game that they're playing. You can buy these video games and play them yourselves. They're buying them because they enjoy reacting to the person reacting to the content. And the same practice follows when you're posting on social media too, especially on LinkedIn. People think of LinkedIn as a very button-up platform, and it is. But it is, business is changing. The way that we think about work is changing. And you can have personal, deeply relatable, emotional work experiences. You can have deeply personal, emotional motivations for the work that you do. And those are the things people relate to and want to engage with.
That's fascinating. And, having the principle underneath and knowing it before you make the decision is so important. And, what I'm taking away is when I'm thinking about something, figure out how I can share my experience. And what this requires is being honest and being yourself in public, which a lot of people don't want to do. But if you want to be successful in social media, what I hear you saying is you got to be yourself in public, or maybe have somebody stand in for you, like the toothbrush experience. But if it's you, it's better.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be you. There's some people who are genuinely uncomfortable with using themselves as a tool or sharing personal experiences just because they feel like they have to or they feel an obligation to.
Mhm.
Don't make that compromise for yourself, right? There's always other ways to do things. You can talk about your client's experiences rather than your own, right? Everyone works with people because you have a business. Why are you posting on social media? Because you're trying to engage with people that you want to hire, you want to do business with in some capacity. If that's the case, you can always highlight them. And they appreciate being highlighted, right? So that's another way around that process. So Bill Harper asked a really good question here. Can you give an example of how you might approach someone who is doing something that is keeping them from reaching their goal, but doesn't know it or believe that what they're doing is actually limiting their success? Yes. In fact, I want to come up with a specific example, but I want to give you some standard guidelines you can use to help somebody who's already entrenched in a belief potentially progress their belief. So if you take someone who has a belief that is impeding their success and you tell them you need to do this differently, or I think you're doing this wrong, you're not going to be very successful. You already know this, but I'm just rephrasing it. If you sit down with them and essentially ask them about what goals they want to achieve, you got to make sure that these are their goals, right? The goals that you're setting for them in your own mind are actually their goals. Sit down with them and ask them questions, right? The way that a person's belief, you can't destroy a belief, but you can evolve a belief. You can have a belief progress into a belief that's more effective seamlessly. And the way that you do that is by allowing that person to make that progression, that logical journey. So if someone is saying, essentially, let's say someone's doing their own bookkeeping. They're a business owner, they do their own bookkeeping, and it's really slowing them down. And they need a bookkeeper, but they don't want to give up the work because they know how to bookkeep. And if I have the skills, why would I give these things to someone else? Right? That's our example. You sit down with that person and you say, hey, Bob, what are the goals? You and I talk a lot about your business and your goals. Let's rehash what those are. What are you looking to achieve next month? And they say, I'm looking to achieve these different things. You ask another question. What are the things standing between you right now and you reaching those goals? And they say, time management. and you say, great, what are some of the things that are that are taking up a lot of your time that you feel that you could be handing off to another person? And they think about it and they go, well, perhaps I should not be mowing my lawn every 5 days and should be mowing every 8 days or whatever it is, right? They can progress through. And then you ask, well, is that time savings you're gonna have from making that change going to be enough for you to address your timekeeping issue and to reach your goal? And they're going to say no. And then you're going to say, well, what else do you think you could be doing that will help you free up your bandwidth? And then they're thinking about it and they're struggling and they're going, I'm really stuck here. And then, you essentially, this is the key moment. You want to be very, very careful in addressing it. But it's like, you can tell that person, you can form a new belief saying, hey, Bob, you can't do everything yourself. I think part of your solution here is that some of the responsibilities you have should be, pushed to other people. Because if you're, you have certain skills that you bring to the world. And, when you go to the supermarket, you're not, growing your own oranges. You're not growing your own apples. You're not growing, making your own bread. You're paying other people to do these things for you. It might make sense for there to be some work that you're doing that you hand off to an outside resource. Have you considered that? Right? So again, you turn it back into a question again. So you plant a new idea or a belief, but you don't fully link them because you need Bob to make the link.
Mhm.
Bob is the one who needs to make the link to say, aha, I need to improve my accounting process. There's an outside person who can do it better. Can you help me find who that person would be? I have these concerns, but we can work through how to address those concerns as part of that process. Bob has to make the decision. All you can do is create an environment that essentially catalyzes that experience for him or enables him to have that experience. And if that fails, which can happen, I mean, you can't control everybody. Sometimes you have to make peace with the fact that you might be better suited to supporting another client, right? But I think that answers it.
I want to get give Rodney an opportunity because he's had his hand up for a while. I do want to respond to what you said though, because this is kind of where we started. So I think what Dave and I realized was this tree approach of objective observer, because we've been thinking a lot about detached observers and accepting incompleteness, not knowing, stepping into that uncomfortability. Those are where the answers come. And when you let somebody else do that and come to their own conclusions because they're seeing their own data visualized, then they can work through it themselves, as opposed to a coach coming in and saying, this is what I see, this is my recommendation, this is the direction you should take. Because even if the person accepts that, underneath, they're still not really accepting it. And that's why a lot of things never get changed or completed. But if you come to your own conclusion and you're in charge of yourself and you're already the expert in yourself, that's a very different kind of experience. So I think we're told, this is kind of where I started today. I mean, that's where we were coming from. And I think it lines up with what you're saying really well. Rodney, you've had your hand up for a while. Sorry, it's taken so long to get to you. You're on mute.
Yeah, that's just fine. Listening to the conversation on the topic of belief systems. So my question I posed in the chat was the imagination, how imagination works into the scope of what we're talking about. So can you imagine yourself being successful? And if so, what would that look like to you? And the picture of what doesn't exist, but you know when you reach your goal to be successful, what does that look like to you?
I think
and when we begin to ask those kinds of questions, it shifts the thinking of, I may not have your answer, but you may have your own answer. What would it look like to you? And how would that affect your life? Well, that's the basis of building any relationship.
Yes.
It's sharing in the vision of the other person and what their vision might look like, and determine if there's something that you can do to be a part of that. Therefore, a relationship grows as you enter into their vision of what they're looking at. And I was just looking at that this morning. If we don't imagine ourselves being changed for our own belief and betterment of our belief systems, then it'll be hard for us to move toward that.
I love your comment. And one of the things that I'm studying is the Socratic questioning method. So I'm about halfway through a book on how to do this, and it lines exactly up with what you say. And it's uncomfortable for people because he presses pretty hard in his method that Plato writes about in the dialogues. But it's the way to do it, really, to get to a reality. But the person has to get to their own reality. So in the Socratic method, you don't tell the person the answer even when you know it. In the method that Dave and I have developed using some ideas from theory of constraints from this guy Goldratt would never go into a company and tell them the answer. He shows them what's happening. He shows them how to figure out for themselves what's happening. And then you get pressed. So you get pressed a little bit and guided a little bit, but at some point you get really pressed. Like, well, if these two things are in conflict and you're doing this, why would that possibly work? But it takes a while before you get somebody to that, right? And then that person, like Chris is saying, they can decide to say, no, screw you, and be defensive and screw themselves. That's somebody else's decision.
So can I offer a question then?
Yes.
Yep.
So the question would be, can you help me understand what your belief system is in comparing relational media to social media?
I think probably my biggest takeaway I want everyone to have from understanding beliefs better is to become more comfortable not having a belief. Once you realize that your brain is oriented towards always trying to make a decision and always trying to, relate things to each other and find patterns and make sense of the world, and you stop it from doing that, you say, I realize what you're trying to do, brain, but you know what? I don't know why I'm scratching my hand. I don't know the answer to this question. I don't know my favorite type of ice cream. I can appreciate the unique qualities of chocolate and vanilla without saying that I prefer one over the other. That's where you are able to obtain essentially an opening for learning. Because once you've made a belief, you're essentially shutting the door and you're saying, hey, this is my perspective. And it's going to be really hard for me to change about myself, let alone trying to change another person's belief. Once I've made a belief, it's hard for me to adapt and then transition to another belief. So once you become more comfortable not having a belief, it makes it easier for you to revert from having a belief to not having a belief. And it makes it easier for you to be a aware observer when you're having conversations with other people of where they're jumping into beliefs or where they're relating experiences they're having to existing beliefs that they have. And then to be aware of what you can do or what wiggle room you have to bring them to where you want to bring them based on the framework they're kind of setting up for you. I like thinking of beliefs as physical structures, right? So it's almost as though you can visualize the way a person's building an argument. And that's why, again, I love this card chart idea, because you could almost in your head visualize like, here is their if-then path that they are building. They're laying out for me. What can I do with this path? Is there a branching path I can help them make off of the main, if-then path they've created?
Yep.
Can I help them start a new belief thread that starts at a different foundational place and builds up to a new answer? The card chart is a great way to navigate essentially helping people to form beliefs and opinions, specifically because it ties back to belief. And you might have someone who actually, so here's another way to help a person change their belief on something. It is to, rather than catch them at the, I'm not happy about the weather in New Jersey, so I want to move to Florida, right? Like, let's say that's the premise. You don't want to catch them at, don't move to Florida, right? Stay in New Jersey. You want to catch them at, what are your favorite weather experiences? What's your favorite season of the year? What do you like in terms of like your climate? What do you like in terms of the different things? You want to start back at the beginning and create a different thread that might lead them to a different conflicting answer with the answer they already had. That's how you change a person's belief, right?
Yeah,
so you don't
fabulous.
interact with the argument they've already made. Create a new thread, create a new structure.
So we're right at the top of the hour here. Chris, I want to thank you. This was fabulous. I love this conversation. I think I've drawn the same conclusions as you have from a totally different side of the world about being a detached observer, not having beliefs, fixed beliefs, the way of approaching other people. So I really appreciate, what you're saying here, and hopefully it was helpful for everybody. I can keep the line open for another 30 minutes for anybody who'd like to stay, and we can break out into small groups of, maybe 3-4 people, and you can kind of do whatever you want in the group. My suggestion is to ask questions of the other person about what they're focused on, what they're trying to accomplish, and where they may be struggling, to get there. And maybe there's some synergies and relationships that can be developed as doing it from doing that. So if anybody wants to or needs to go, it's probably a good time so we can get an accurate count for the room. We're going to send a recap of this meeting with the link to the video and the chat as well, in a follow-up email that'll go out Friday morning. And we do this every week, so feel free to come next week and ongoing if you can make it. But thanks again, Chris. That was great. I really appreciate you spending the time and all the insights and thought you put into doing this, what you've been doing.
Thank you again, Larry. This was great.
Yep. Thank you. Okay. So